Hey everybody, it's Sherry Tutkus.
And Dale Buckman.
And welcome to Green Nurse Radio, Living Your Best Life. Today, we have a show for you all.
We have a great show.
Yeah, it's amazing. We had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Jordan Tishler, and we have a little, last week, we had a little clip. We're going to be talking today about Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome and cyclic vomiting syndrome. Two very distinct conditions that have been confused.
And a lot of talk in the community has been about that this is something that's been made up, it isn't true, or it's due to this or that. And we have a guest today that's going to tell us otherwise and share his story.
Yep. And then we have expert Dr. Jordan Tishler, who's going to give a little insight into this condition and what his thoughts are.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get started on these very rare conditions, we're going to talk a little bit about what is a green nurse. This is a green nurse radio show, right? What does it mean to be a green nurse? Green nurse is total health care. It is entourage of health. Dale and I have been working as nurses for a very long time. Between myself, Dale, and Jody, we've had over 70 years of nursing experience. Caring for patients across the spectrum from pediatrics to geriatrics in multiple patient settings. And what we found is that we've been compartmentalizing health.
Yeah, we give a medication, you have a problem, you go in to see your provider, and here's the solution, write a prescription.
Yeah.
But really, what it's all about, including cannabis, because cannabis helps a lot of different conditions, but it's not just all about cannabis. It's about all the lifestyle related issues that we've been talking about. Diet, the nutrition is very important. Stress management, exercise, sleep
issues. So biopsychosocial, spiritual aspects of healing our body. How do we take care of our body? How do we take care of our mind and our emotions? How do we process emotions? How are we interacting in our social lives with people? Do we have a healthy, thriving social life? And spiritually, what is our connection to others and to the unseen world?
And to ourselves.
Exactly.
And cannabis happens to be one of those medications that we can look at the biopsychosocial, spiritual aspects of healing all in one.
Yeah. So Green Nurse is a philosophy. Green Nurse life is a way that we want to teach people how to get back to whole health using multiple tools so they can live their best life, so you can enjoy a high quality of life and get out there and do the things that you're meant to do. So we're so grateful to have that opportunity here to share that. GreenNurse.com.
Coming soon.
GreenNurse.com. Dale's been doing research. She's getting her PhD. We're very excited. She's going to be graduating soon. And basically, GreenNurse.com is going to be a depository of research.
Yeah.
So if we're going to be saying things and talking on the show about various subjects medically, not just about cannabis, but other things, we want to have a site where you can go to get information, to get research, to substantiate what we're actually bringing information to you. Right? So GreenNurse.com on the way.
On the way, coming soon.
Right?
Yep.
And then Green Nurse on the go.
Green Nurse on the go. Sherry and I love to get out into the community. We love to educate. And Green Nurse on the go is just all about that.
Yeah. It's about bringing community together. It's about bridging the gap, not only from what people aren't getting from traditional medicine, but bringing two communities together, really educating about the benefits of cannabis and bringing you information that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. Part of our Green Nurse on the Go is we're creating a live documentary of patient stories that are going to continue to be shared, because what we have found is that when people have the ability to share their story, it continues their healing process, and it also brings hope to other people that are listening.
Yeah.
Right, so that's really important. So now that we just plugged ourselves, we'll get back to the show. So, huh?
You're so cute.
I can't help it. Anyway, so just a couple little things. I research. That's what we do. I delved into the computer. I literally was engrossed into the computer looking up cyclic vomiting syndrome, Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome. I Googled, I looked at videos, and there isn't a lot of information out there.
Yeah, there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it.
Yeah.
So.
But one of the things, it basically, it just started to be examined in around 2004.
2004, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the condition is so rare. Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, who wrote the book Cannabis Revealed, we had the opportunity of meeting her at the Museum of Science a few weeks ago. And she talked about Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome and that it's so rare that she's only seen it in her 10 years of experience with 2 patients. So we want to talk a little bit about the difference between that and cyclic vomiting syndrome. And before we delve into our interview, I'll just talk a little bit about what Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome is. Mm-hmm. Basically, it has been seen as a cyclical vomiting syndrome with patients that have had long-term use using high THC products.
So nausea, vomiting, epigastric pain,
colicky pain, right? And basically, so it's severe nausea and vomiting, cyclic patterns of nausea and vomiting over months, the colicky abdominal pain, delayed gastric emptying, okay, so slowing of the gastrointestinal system. And the classic thing for these patients that have been suffering from this is that they take hot baths and hot showers.
For relief.
To relieve the symptoms
so,
of this.
Often these symptoms go missed for a long time because a lot of providers, a lot of physicians and nurses, they don't know about this. They don't know a lot about cannabis either, but this in particular, because it's so rare, they just don't see it enough.
Yep. And as we all know, we all have an endocannabinoid system. It's the largest neurotransmitter signaling system in our bodies that regulates all of the other body systems. So its goal, its purpose is to bring balance back into our bodies. So what happens? One of the theories is that when you're flooding your body with so much THC, what happens? If it becomes out of balance, it's all about balance.
In moderation.
In moderation.
So when people say everything in moderation,
cannabis
is the same, no different.
It's the same thing.
And other theories are, years ago, when we were kids, the THC level in cannabis was just much, much lower than it is today. So if you did see it years ago, which they didn't really discover it till 2004, it would have been a lot, somebody would have had to been using a much higher level of cannabis than they would need to today because of the higher levels of THC.
Yeah.
And
the difference too, what they've talked about is that CHS, so cyclic vomiting syndrome, has comorbidities of patients that have migraine headaches, psychiatric illness, either anxiety or depression, and they have rapid gastric emptying. Some patients use cannabis and some don't. So the difference between cyclic vomiting syndrome and cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is that cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, all of the patients are high THC cannabis users. And basically their symptoms are relieved by taking hot baths. And I'll talk a little bit in a minute about why that works. And resolution of symptoms after they stop using cannabis.
so there is a cure.
There's a cure.
Unfortunately, most people don't like it.
Yeah, and it's rare. So if we have a system that we want to keep in balance, it just makes sense that too much of anything isn't good for our bodies, right? So the hot bath thing, I just thought was fascinating. I mean, I was literally engrossed into the computer, and I learned about these receptors. TRPV1 receptors are receptors that regulate our perception of pain, inflammation, and body temperature. So what the research has shown, I have the coolest diagram, is that when we flood our body with too much THC, it inactivates these TRPV1 receptors, When you inactivate these TRPV1 receptor, it leads to nausea and vomiting via central nervous system and vagal effects. So then the second piece of it is so when you inactivate these TRPV1 receptors, it decreases and alters gastric mobility. So the hot baths and the showers, basically what it does is, because we have TRP1 receptors in our skin, so people that are in these hot baths and showers, they start to relax, right? They start to vasodilate, and it starts to reactivate the TRPV1 receptors to alleviate symptoms. So we have a wonderful guest here, and he's just amazing, and his story is just incredible. But before we talk to him, let's just hear a little bit about what Dr. Tishler has to say in this upcoming video. Everybody, is Sherry Tutkus.
And Dale Buckman.
And welcome to Green Nurse Radio Show, Living Our Best Life. We have Cannabis Specialist Expert, Dr. Jordan Tishler from InhaleMD on today. And we're going to talk a little bit about Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome.
It's quite a mouthful, isn't it?
It is.
And the difference between that and cyclic vomiting.
Cyclical vomits.
Yeah, cyclic.
Yeah. Well, neither is anything you really want to have.
Sounds pretty upsetting.
Yeah, so, back in the early 2000s, people started slowly to realize that they were seeing these cases of youngish people presenting over and over and over again to the emergency room, vomiting completely out of control. And the thing that started to come to people's attention was that these were relatively heavy or long-term cannabis users. And the other bit that was really strange was that these cannabis users would figure out over time that the only thing that made them feel better was to get in the bath or the shower really hot. And it got to the point where there were some descriptions of basically being unable to sort of pry these people out of the shower, out of the bathroom. And it turns out that that little feature is really the hallmark. And so you mentioned cyclical vomiting syndrome, which is another vomiting illness which doesn't seem to have an explanation. We simply see that some people vomit uncontrollably every once in a while.
For reasons that they can't figure out.
No reasons we can understand. I mean, it's probably some sort of psychosocial stressor that causes these periods of vomiting, and then things get better in whatever those externals are, and then the vomiting stops until it gets worse again. So our feeling is...
So with cyclic vomiting syndrome, can cannabis help that? Because as we know, Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome, we want to abstain from cannabis.
That's absolutely right. So the only thing that seems to make cannabis hyperemesis get better is stopping to use the cannabis, which obviously for most people who were using the cannabis for some purpose, that's not something they want to hear. But we've seen many cases of people stopping for a while, getting better, returning to the cannabis, and most, not all, but most of them get sick again.
Right.
So it really does mean that if you end up in those shoes, that is sort of the end of your cannabis career, if you will. The cyclical vomiting is unrelated to cannabis, and frankly, to your question of whether cannabis could be useful for those folks, I think the answer is we haven't the faintest idea. The reality is, thankfully, both of these are sufficiently rare that it's not like we have a large pool of people on whom to try things and an accumulated wisdom of how these things go. My sense is that it's probably not the best idea, but that may be me being overly cautious.
Right.
But
So is this about THC, or does it include CBD, THC, CBG, all these other cannabinoids?
Oh, that's a really good question too. And again, I think I'm going to have to say we don't really know insofar as this is a syndrome, meaning it's a collection of symptoms that we see that is associated with the use of cannabis.
So what are all those symptoms?
Well, it's primarily vomiting. Just vomiting. But it's incessant vomiting. It's not like, okay,
debilitating vomiting, where you can't leave the house.
Can't leave the house, basically can't leave the bathroom kind of thing.
Oh.
So, it's not like, oh, I have a little tummy ache and I puked once. This is something where, you're just miserable vomiting in the shower. Maybe you come out for a little while to eat and maybe smoke some more cannabis, and then suddenly you're right back in the
shower.
And it becomes very difficult for us as practitioners to convince these cannabis users that they'll actually be better without cannabis, particularly because we know that cannabis, at least in low dose, can be used to treat nausea and vomiting, particularly associated with cannabis, with cancer treatment, for example. So there's something about this that's sort of counterintuitive until you start to remember the things that you often say, which is the endocannabinoid system is about maintaining homeostasis, balance. So if you're a little bit off balance in one direction, cannabis can pull you back into balance. But if you use so much cannabis, you can actually push yourself out of balance in the other direction. And that, I think, really is how I reconcile cannabis being useful for certain kinds of nausea and vomiting and harmful in other fields.
Do you see this, is it equally among women and men? Or
Yes.
And are we seeing more of it, or are we just recognizing it for what it is now?
I think it's more that we're recognizing it for what it is. I mean, there have always been reports of people presenting over and over again to the emergency room with these vomiting illnesses, and it's really only now that we have legalization in one form or another that we've been able to get at the history of their cannabis use and kind of piece this together. And we've certainly seen over the last couple of years more diagnoses of cannabis hyperemesis, some of which is because now we're able to make that diagnosis because people are being more direct with us. But also I think that emergency room doctors have learned of this syndrome and are perhaps overdiagnosing it simply because it's now on their mind.
Right,
You don't diagnose things you're not thinking of.
Right.
And I've been involved in a couple of reviews over the last few years, one out of San Francisco and one out of Denver, where the diagnosis was made. And when I looked at the actual history, it didn't strike me as that was the right diagnosis, but the fact was that people were aware of the potential and kind of added things up, and in that case, not in the right way.
Wow.
You know, things have faddishness to them in medicine just as much as anywhere else.
Right. Now there's a, the culture, the cannabis community often says, well, that's just the stigma. They're making that up. They're saying that this really isn't a disorder. Then there's some people that are also saying, well, it could be the types, how they're growing it, the nutrients, the pesticides,
Some kind of toxin.
the mold, so we get a lot of pushback.
There's been a lot of discussion about neem oil, which is an organic pesticide, and whether that neem oil might cause the cannabis hyperemesis. The problem with that is, and I'm not saying it's not true, but neem oil is classically used to grow strawberries. And we don't see people getting cannabis hyperemesis-like syndrome from their strawberries. So I don't know what to make of that. It could be dose dependent. Maybe people are using more cannabis than they eat strawberries, but at least in terms of surface area of the substrate, that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So I don't know whether it's I guess if you really pushed me, I think it's probably about the endocannabinoid system and the THC.
Right. Just too much.
It's just too much, exactly.
Right.
It's your body saying, whoa, you know what, chill out, dude.
Well, if you think about it, okay, let's just think about a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. I like to go to my umbrella concept. At the top of the umbrella is the endocannabinoid system, and the spokes in the umbrella are the other body systems. So if we have receptors on all of these different systems of our cells and our bodies to maintain homeostasis, and we have our own endogenous cannabinoids that we make.
That's right.
And basically, if we're bringing in cannabinoids as these keys to go into these locks and we're flooding our body, we're not giving our bodies its own chance to produce its own.
Well, in fact, what happens when you flood them is that the cells that are looking for our endocannabinoids go, oh my God, it's so much. And these receptors, you can think of them as like little antenna. I think of them as sort of, microwave antennas, little round dishes, right? And what they do is they say, look, I'm getting way too much stimulation, so let me pull these antennae in, right? Well, now it's not getting as much signal from being bombarded with the cannabis cannabinoids, but then there aren't enough antennas out there to hear the endocannabinoids. And so you need for some people where the endocannabinoid tone may be low, and therefore we can use the phytocannabinoids, the cannabis cannabinoids, to bolster that, that's great. But at some point, you go too far in the other direction. And this is what dependence, the formation of dependence, but also outcomes like cannabis hyperemesis. We have to remember the gut has as many neurons as the brain.
Right.
Right?
The microbiome.
Exactly. And those gut neurons are very densely packed with CB1 receptors. So there's all manner of reason to understand that those phytocannabinoids are doing something dramatic and important in the gut as well as throughout the rest of the body and the central nervous system. But if we overdo it, that's no good either.
Right.
So is this something that's dose dependent necessarily? Would somebody have to be, are we seeing this in exclusively with long-term users, or somebody that's just new to cannabis?
No, it's only long-term users and heavy users. And heavy users are defined in this literature as users that I think many cannabis heavy users would scoff at, so a gram a day, which is an ounce a month. And certainly we see people who are using significantly more than that. But if you can get into trouble with an ounce a month, then I think it's quite likely that you can get into trouble with, numbers north of that.
Right.
It would be lovely to say, if you peel it back, if you come back to something that's more reasonable, that you'll be okay, but we're not seeing that. And again, the numbers of people who have this and are diagnosed with it are low enough that we can't really make sweeping generalizations. But in those handful of cases, when they have retried cannabis, even at more moderate doses, they've tended to get sick again. And so that's an unfortunate reality that we just, I'd like to think that people would be more likely to give up the cannabis than to continue puking. But
Right.
I guess
Or
that's...
even the possibility of, giving up the THC and maybe trying other, forms of cannabinoids
like THCA.
that could actually help upregulate and help their manage symptoms so they're not getting the bad side effect.
I haven't seen any in patients, right? So, and part of this is, of course, who uses enough and who presents to the emergency room. But I think that it's very unlikely that anybody who's using this for a medical purpose in a sort of thoughtful, reproducible, lowish dose, I don't think it's very unlikely that they're ever going to see this sort of thing.
Right.
It's the people who are using it in a sort of more aggressive fashion, aka the recreational users, where they develop this stuff. So it's not clear to me necessarily that particular user group is going to get benefit from some of the non-psychotropic ones like THCA or CBD or something like that. I think it doesn't rule them out of using that. It's just a question of why would they want those things? And if they then transition from being a recreational person into being a patient down the road, say as they get older and their knees start to bother them, then I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to try some of these other cannabinoids. But I think, we just don't know enough yet to know whether this will or won't trigger a problem. So one probably has to do it with a lot of disclosure and discussion and some close monitoring.
Right. Right. Dr. Tishler, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
How do you like them apples? Right, Dr. Jordan Tishler, he's absolutely amazing. He had some great insight. And welcome back. And in the studio right now, we are with Zach. Zach, welcome.
Thank you.
You have an incredible story to share, and I'm hoping that your story might help someone else.
Hope so too.
Yeah. So, Zach, you developed Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome. How long and when did you start using cannabis?
I probably started when I was about 13 years old.
And how old are you now?
38.
Okay.
And when did you develop?
It's tough to say specifically. When I think about when I started to have, stomach pains and things that seemed like they came out of nowhere, I'd say somewhere in about 10 or 12 years ago, in that range.
Wow. Okay.
And how much cannabis were you using?
At that point, when they started to emerge, I would say it was borderline habitual. I mean, it was in the morning, throughout the day, into the evening, at night, like most people would enjoy, beer or a glass of wine. That was always the mainstay for me.
Was it multiple different methods of administration or just one way?
I tended to be, at that time, it was more of smoking flower itself, but we'd incorporate edibles, and as vapes came out and stuff like that, that was something I definitely gravitated towards, as did most people. But yeah, there really wasn't much I was opposed to at the time.
Right. And so what happened when you first got sick?
The first vomiting episode, I got admitted to the hospital, and no one could give me any answers, and it was actually from Logan via ambulance, and we basically sat there, and no one could give me answers, and
so they're doing a
they offered a
complete
bunch of
clinical.
tests.
Yeah, I was going to say they're doing a complete clinical workup.
Yep.
And did they have any thoughts on what it could be?
They gave me fluids. They gave me, if I remember, it was Zofran, and they wanted to hold me there, and they wanted to run all these full spectrum of tests. And at the time, something in my gut told me I didn't need to, and I checked myself out and drove home.
Okay. And then what happened?
About 6 months or 8 months later. It's tough to say the exact dates because at that time we weren't tracking it. It just seemed at random.
So, but in between, the time that you first had your first episode and the second episode. So the first episode,
I went home and smoked.
you went home and smoked.
And did it
Come
At
back.
the time, it was the trapdoor back into feeling comfortable and feeling like myself and feeling, okay, I got through this. It eased the nausea. It increased my appetite again because I had lost a significant amount of weight through the vomiting episode over multiple days. And it's slowly right back to normal, the same input and the same amount of usage.
Were you compelled to take baths then? Did that?
At that point, I
Not
can't be
yet.
honest with you, I can't remember. I know that the next episode where I was home, and I can't even tell you why. Maybe it was.
Did you feel cold? Like because when we were talking about when we were flooding our body with THC, the TRPV1 receptors are responsible for thermoregulation and body temperature. So I'm just wondering, maybe did you get cold because you think you get constricted?
I think I did, but at the time I attributed it to, I thought that the blood in my body was going to my stomach
Right.
to heal that, and as a result I was feeling cold. But yeah, to answer your question, yes. And the hot shower seemed to provide relief, and at the time no one knew why, we had no idea, but it just worked. So I probably spooled the water heater 7 to 8 times that day.
Wow.
So were there multiple trips to the emergency department, or was that just one? Did you go to your doctor? Did you have...
Yeah, follow up.
I can think of 4 different trips to the emergency room, or 5 over the grand scheme of things. I did go see a gastro that we knew through the family and I trusted, and he ran a pretty decent spectrum of tests, did ultrasound, drank barium, checked out the results, and every theory we had was kind of debunked, and he couldn't give me a straight answer. And in the end, I went on a prescription of Nexium, which quickly thereafter became over the counter.
Right.
And causes multiple drug nutrient depletions. It's one of the things we focus
Amongst
on.
other things.
Amongst other
by
things.
the way.
But yeah.
Dementia. No.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, look up that. It's horrible.
Yeah.
Right away. Here you go. Here's a pill.
And he knew me, and he was genuinely trying to help.
Of course.
And so
they mean well.
at the time, I still, something in my gut told me I shouldn't be taking it, but because I didn't have what I felt like was a stomach acid problem.
Yeah.
But when I look back over it, it was always at the time in my mind, well, I ate these hot buffalo chicken wings and right after I vomited, so I stopped eating those. And then one night it was a nice bottle of wine at dinner, and I vomited, so I stopped having wine. And quickly it became this list of foods that I was avoiding constantly, which limited what I was willing to do and things of that
And
nature.
nobody could figure it out.
No one could give me an answer. The answer came about in a really inadvertent way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how many years did you suffer from this before you figured it out?
8 to 10,
Wow.
and I was at a friend of the family's house who's very well respected in the medical community in Massachusetts and has a very large water heater. And I was alone with my kids there overnight with their family, and I had an episode. And at about 2 in the morning, he heard his shower still going, and it's been going forever.
Wow.
He's watched me grow up, came right in, asked me what was going on. And my answer was, I have to do this. I don't know, I can't explain why. It's the only thing that stops it.
Yeah.
And it was just that cycle of going back to the bed and 15 to 30 minutes later vomiting again, getting back in the shower. And your stress point at that moment is worrying when the hot water heater's going to run out and worrying how long it's going to take to heat up again. because it's the one source of relief.
Yeah.
And
He stayed up all night. He writes research papers, and he researched it and couldn't come up with a definitive answer. And his daughter and my friend came down that morning. He mentioned it to her, what was going on, and coincidentally she had read an article in High Times 2 days prior and came down and said, could it be this? And when my wife drove 2 hours to come get me, and a whole band of people take the car back and everything, because at that point you're incapacitated for quite some time, they told her right on the spot, this is what he has, he needs to stop it. And that was 2+ years ago, and I just wasn't ready to hear it.
Yeah.
So.
And this is like a lot of people in the community that aren't ready to hear it, and that's okay. But here it is what we say: everything works and nothing works. You have to figure out what works for you. Cannabis is personal. It is a medicine. It needs to be respected, and the goal of it is to bring about wellness, homeostasis, and balance.
Yep.
just feeling good. And so a medicine that has been used forever to treat nausea and vomiting very effectively, I might add.
Extremely effectively.
And now it's causing it.
It can go against you if you go without any limiting factors.
We were talking a little bit earlier too about, so when you think about, so say we have our body that is flooded with THC, and you start to get into that vomiting syndrome, you think of what happens to your body. Physiologically, you constrict, you tighten up. When you're vomiting, you're doing like crunches.
It's a great way to get an 8-pack. So you can always see your abs at the end of a vomiting episode.
So, but I know, but just like
But we don't recommend it.
we don't recommend it.
Not as a good workout anyway.
Because the combination of two things are happening, right? You're losing fluids, you're becoming dehydrated, your muscles are constricting. When when you have food deprivation, our body wants to protect itself. So what do you start doing? You start squeezing those fat cells.
You go into ketosis.
Ketosis. Lipolysis, I'm not saying it right. Why am I drawing a blank? Where the fat cells burst for energy, right? And then that's where the THC is stored in the fat cells. So here you have a cyclical syndrome.
And it makes perfect sense when you look at it from a physiological standpoint, what's going on in your body. So what brought you to the point where you finally said, okay, I give?
It was a combination of two things. One, I got really good at going through these episodes.
So what do you mean?
I became proficient at it. What lands you in the emergency room is the dehydration. Your hands start to seize, your skin starts to stick, and that's what'll land you in the emergency room without any hesitation.
Because
the
you
rest
can go
of
into
it,
kidney failure.
if you can handle the pain and discomfort and get through it, you can manage it. I don't recommend it, but you can. And I realized that if I didn't figure out a way to stay hydrated through those episodes, I was going to continue in the emergency room, and I really hate the emergency room.
Yeah.
So what I would start doing, against my wife's recommendations and all common sense, is as soon as I'd finished vomiting, I would start drinking water and drinking Gatorade, knowing it's going to come up. But if you get enough in, I realized you could absorb enough where you wouldn't go into a full-blown dehydration.
Right.
And so I got through like 2 like that over a 6-month gap between them. And the second one, which was about 2 months ago, I got through it. My wife even commented, wow, you got through that easier than any of them. And I went on a business trip 4 days later thinking, well, I know I'm good. It's not going to happen again. It's going to be at least 4 months. And 4 days later, it happened again. And this time I was alone in the car, hours from home, and had to drive home and pull over several times on the highway just to vomit, just to get home.
That's horrible.
And when the second one in a 4 or 5 day span, there was nothing else to think about.
So over the years, this is something that happens intermittently. Did the bouts happen closer and closer together?
I think it probably started out as probably a year between them, or 8 months.
And how long did each one last?
24 to 36 hours of full-blown intensity.
And then the pain, how was it painful? Some people say the epigastric pain is so
I would
bad
wake
that-
up, see that's the thing, is I would wake up with pain almost every single day in between them. And I just figured, I got bad guts. Or we'd go out to a nice meal at an incredible restaurant, and I realized I was eating with fear. It was just a matter of when is this going to sit in, And I'm a Johnson and Wales grad, and it's something I always really enjoyed and found passion in. It wasn't fun anymore. It was
So
more
for
of like
years you live like this?
I think subconsciously you just assume you believe it's everything else. I convinced myself it was anything but that, because if I admitted it was that, one of the things that I held most dear in terms of my habits and how I live my life, where my passions lie, conflicted with it.
Right.
Yeah, that's really hard. And one of the things that's important is that it is rare, but it still happens. There's rare genetic disorders, but someone still gets them.
And I mean, so you've done a lot of research on this. You've read a lot about it. You've talked to a lot of people.
Anyone I could talk to, anybody who I thought had knowledge worth hearing, and anything I could find. But as you know, there's really not that much out there. The thing that convinced me was the hot showers. It's the one common thread through everything you read, and there's not any other medical condition I'm aware of that provides immediate relief.
And then when you look at the physiology,
right,
it just makes sense.
Makes sense.
But
so socially, I mean, this is a very social.
Yeah, of course.
I don't want to call it a drug because I feel like
Well,
it's offensive.
It's a very social plant.
It's a very social plant. So how did that affect your social life?
Did pulling back from it?
Pulling back, and did people say to you, come
You're
on, you're
nuts,
crazy, it's
this
not
isn't
true,
true. Oh my
this
God,
is made
you're
up,
full
it's
of
the
it."
chemicals.
I heard
Right.
a lot of naysayers, and I'm fortunate I have a lot of great people around me, and everyone is extremely supportive, and I never asked anyone to change their behavior around me, and if I'm there, it's my choosing to be there. But at the end of the day, there's more people that don't want to believe it than are willing to. But as people know, and more and more people with the legalization, the intensity and potency of cannabis these days, and the dab culture and concentrates and vapes, the access is so great now, and there's so few limiting factors that more and more people my age and younger are just going full bore. I get it. I'm one of them. And if you're the unlucky one that has a genetic predisposition to this, and there seems to be more and more of them as the base of people using it with this frequency grows, it's hard to deny.
Yeah.
And again, the potency is much, 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 much higher than when,
Exponentially
30
higher.
years ago than it is now.
Yep.
And the dab culture, that just even gives it another big kick out, right?
And that's in the last 5 years that's really taken off.
Yeah, and there have been patients that I've known that if you overdo it, you have a bad effect.
Yeah.
Microdosing cannabinoids.
Which is what Sherry and I were just talking about. In comparison, people that use this for their entire life, and they say that's nonsense, it couldn't be, but they were actually compared in relative to today's percentage of THC. Years ago it was microdosing.
Yeah, so years and years ago, the cannabis plant didn't have as high amounts of THC in it. So when people were consuming daily, multiple times, it was as if they were microdosing.
Yeah.
Whereas today, it's macrodosing, right? And that's what we want.
It really
to.
is. It's like growing up and somebody who drank beer their whole life telling you, well, you drink the same volume or more of hard alcohol, saying, how can you have all these problems? Well, you're not comparing apples to apples.
Yeah.
It's it's a totally different league.
Whoops.
Miss
Which is why we're
Lucy.
seeing more cases of it and hearing more about it in the emergency department
Yeah.
and
Yep.
more in the news. So
Yeah. So one of the things, I remember one of the things that we were talking about is, I'd like to go back.
Yeah.
When you started using cannabis, what did it do for you?
At the time, it was just fun.
It was just fun.
It was, when you're in an adolescent at that stage, 13, 14, 15, and all the, I don't know, school wasn't fun for me. It was a tough time in life, and that was the thing. You're with your friends, your best friend, you smoke some pot at the end of the day, on the weekends, what have you. It was just a good time. It was effortless.
Yeah.
I liked the effects of it far more than I ever did alcohol.
Yeah.
And it was, at the time, seemingly harmless. It was,
Remember some of the questions I had asked, because we talk about how did it help you physically, how did it help you mentally, emotionally, spiritually?
a lot, quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think it helped me kind of traverse some things that for a lot of people may have been a sticking point in life in terms of development or willingness to be self-aware. You can kind of blast through those things a lot easier.
Emotional processing.
Yeah, without a doubt.
and what about now? I mean, now that are you still using it?
I stopped October 1st completely after that second episode in a row in a short period, out of fear of long-term effects, out of fear of what it was going to cost me in every possible way in terms of missing stuff of my family.
Was this last year?
No, this is
Just this past.
Just this
a
past?
little over 30 days ago.
Okay.
So what's that, 38 days ago?
30, okay.
So that was 25 years of full-blown use, you know, and I lived on the West Coast and experienced that cannabis culture, and it was a tough transition.
And how do you feel about that?
Having done it,
Having not smoked since October 1st, how do you feel?
I don't know if I've really thought about that aspect of it. It's more of the health stuff that I've focused on. I feel foolish that I didn't give it a more honest approach earlier.
But
To
there's good
critically
news.
evaluate.
There's
Yeah.
good news, I promise you.
Yeah.
Because the good news is the light at the end of the
Tunnel.
silver lining.
Yeah,
here.
that
I don't
yours?
think this is a forever change. This is a from what I've seen in research, it's 3 to 6 months of nothing, and you can potentially, if you haven't gone too far for too long, essentially reset the system.
But there's something else you can use in the
all the-
meantime.
right.
That's what I'm getting
where's
at.
that-
Oh,
There's that
okay,
little
yeah. So
Right?
I have some friends that are incredible cultivators, without a doubt, and they are up north,
I gotta smell that again.
Woodstock Pharmacy,
Look at
and
beautiful.
they
That
grew
is
an
a
acre of
fat
hemp this
beauty.
year, and
So hemp.
Hemp, right? This is
that
hemp.
was the thing that made the transition doable for me. I
This
was
is
able
not
to-
industrial hemp, so
No.
people know.
This is grown with the same care and attention that most people would apply to their what they would
high
consider elite
CBD
cannabis.
flowering cannabis.
So
Yep.
CBD does not have the same effect.
No
It does-
psychoactive effects. Does not, from everything I've felt post this transition and using this frequently, it doesn't have any of the negative effects of that THC was having on my system, and it still provides you an ability to kind of calm down, alleviate a lot of the anxiety that seemed like I was running down a hallway of it all of a sudden with no
Right.
door out. 25 years of that type of use. Anytime things seem stressful or a little overwhelming, it was what I was doing. It's what most people do, that I know. And this gave me a little bit of what I need to get through that transition.
Yeah.
So CBD can help.
CBD can
Without a
help.
doubt.
That's the good news.
So how did you? So if people need to stop or go on a tolerance break
Yeah.
or to reset,
Yeah.
what are you doing? What are you doing?
Everything kind of you were touching at the beginning of the show. Diet's important. Sleep is paramount. But it was a conscious decision just to do it. Instead of feeling like I was losing out or this or that, you have to approach it as something positive. If you don't,
silver
for me, it
lining.
would have been overwhelming.
So tell us about when you decided October 1st came
Yep.
and you said, okay, you said to your wife, honey, this is it, I'm done.
Yeah.
What happened to you? How were you emotionally?
It affected you.
Did you
I-
respond in a way that was?
I'm sure I was definitely more irritable, and you're suddenly dealing with things that as before were always kind of like the volume was turned down on, and you're dealing with it full-blown intensity.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the easiest thing, but it's a lot easier, I'll tell you what, than sitting on the bottom of a shower for 24 to 36 hours, or picking up your kids at school and having them watch you pull the car over to vomit out the door. Like, I'd rather go through that than go through the rest of it over a long term. It's
Right.
as somebody wise once told me, it's short term pain for long term gain. What's hard is easy, and what's easy is hard.
Wow.
So it was a good change, without a doubt.
So what are you doing now to live your best life?
The changes haven't been much other than just the stopping use of all cannabis products. No edibles, no vaping.
Of THC.
Of THC. So I still I'll have a CBD pen that I'll use. It's pure CBD isolate. The hemp is my favorite because you're still getting that active smoking and the flavor, and you can still use it, as you mentioned, in social situations where everyone else is, passing around a joint or a blunt. I'll roll up mine.
Pass around the hemp.
And it's funny. It's people are you get somebody who's approaching it with care, and you can blow the people's socks off with the quality of this versus just the simple quality of flower that they know.
Yeah. And I tried that, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's a nice full spectrum CBD hemp plant. Very gentle, non-intoxicating,
Yep.
relaxing.
I wish more people would put that time and care and attention into the cultivation of hemp.
Yeah.
But for right now, it seems like the go-to is commercial cultivation and mass production, and a lot of it's,
THC.
you know, you're losing a lot of the magic through creating isolate and kind of the way it's processed.
Yeah, because the isolate, it's one compound, and we all know entourage.
Yep.
The whole of the plant is greater than its individual parts.
Without a doubt, full spectrum is the magic.
That's how it works in our bodies.
So the other, I just want to go back a
Yeah.
little bit too. So after using it, because I don't use cannabis and I never have, and so, but I hear about stories when somebody's using something that much and so much. When you stop it, did you have withdrawal symptoms? Did you have?
I thought it would be much more severe than it was. The positives so greatly outweighed any of the negatives. The morning stomach pains almost instantly subsided within like 3 to 4 days.
That's significant.
That's
To the
Wow.
point where I was kind of like, is this coming back?
Did you think that now you know for sure it wasn't the food and it was the cannabis? Did you start to eat? Are you eating different foods again?
Are you back
adding
to your
things
normal
back
diet?
in?
Yeah, like a friend, now I'll go to a friend's house, hey, would you like a beer? Sure. Whereas before it was absolutely not. The only alcohol I would consume was a tequila or a mezcal because it was the only one, because of from what I understand, the way your body processes those sugars, that made me feel okay.
Yeah.
Anything else just was always not worth the risk.
And what about the wings? Because I love wings.
I'm still scared of buffalo wings.
Wait, but here's the thing with
I don't
buffalo
know if I can
wings.
live without those.
Yeah.
But here's the things with the buffalo wings. It's the hot sauce,
Right.
right? So
You
the heat
think, I don't,
will keep us dilated.
Air fryer.
at some point I'll venture back into that, but for right now I don't take any medications, I don't take any of the acid reducers, and I feel better than I have in 10 years and more consistently.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's very significant.
It's the
Yeah.
epitome of irony.
The epitome of irony.
It's, you know, every time I'd feel nauseous, I would smoke, and it was something I always had on me in case, and now it's not even a thought. And don't get me wrong, I'm still really looking forward to being able to use it more responsibly and targeted.
Right.
And at the end of a 6-month kind of detox period here.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. Part of it is I want to see if the system did reset, but I also really miss it. You know, it's something I enjoy as much as anybody.
Definitely be following up
Yeah.
on that to see how you do. Yeah, it's a pretty incredible story. So
Yeah. So it is real.
it's real.
Unfortunately, yeah, it is
Mythbuster
real.
here.
Yeah, but everyone, you know,
I
it's,
wish it wasn't.
I know, huh? To be the one in whatever, a million to
Right,
get it.
but you're rare.
Yeah.
You
many
need
ways.
You're a very rare and unique person here.
Yeah. So what about your family? So were you able to educate them on what was going on? Because I know
They were
we-
educating more than I was educating them in the initial stages, but now that it's something that I've accepted as fact and have gone full bore with all my network, working in the cannabis industry to research and to try and get knowledge at the cutting edge of it. It's something I enjoy sharing with people. It's amazing how many people you'll talk to that will kind of pull you aside and start asking questions.
Yeah.
And the thing I always tell people is, if you find yourself with constant nausea or abdominal discomfort, and you find hot showers provide you instant relief, you need to give this honest thought.
Yeah. you need
It's
to
just
really
that is the best indicator out of everything.
critically evaluate.
Yeah, because
So-
you can avoid it.
Have you met anybody else that has this?
I've met a few people that definitely, I think from what they've told me, they have it, but I think they're more at the stage that I was a year ago, 2 years ago, where they probably realize internally they do, but they're just not ready to make that life change. And
Right.
until you're ready to do it, to quit for a week, I tried everything. It's like somebody trying to quit smoking, I would imagine. I'll stop doing edibles. Okay, I'll stop doing concentrates and dabs. And I thought if I'd take all these things out, that I could beat it and I could kind of cheat the system and still do what I wanted to do. And it got to the point I was only consuming organic flour that I knew the producers of. Like, it couldn't have been cleaner, because most people
Yeah.
tell you,
Right.
They'll say the neem oil.
people say it's neem
Yeah.
oil, people will tell you it's mold, people will tell you it's pesticides, people will tell you it's the use of products like Eagle and things like that in the production of flour, and they're entitled to their opinion, but at the end of the day, if you take all those things out and you're still experiencing the same symptoms, I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
It
Yeah.
just is.
It's time for you to critically evaluate what you're putting into your body and
Yeah.
how you're responding to it.
Yeah.
It's something that I enjoy the genetics of cannabis and have learned whatever I can from whoever I can constantly, and we have bred cannabis in the last 20 years to be as potent as possible, to be as sexy, as eye appealing as possible, and all those things are great. But what we've done inadvertently is kind of limit the amount of variety in the spectrum of it, if that's the right way to put it, and we've kind of changed all of genetics to aim towards one group of results, when there was all these others previously that were just as valuable, if not more.
Yes.
But now that's the cannabis that society knows, is the stuff that just looks amazing and tastes amazing, and it's great, don't get me wrong, but something that has THC at 22 to 32%, well, it's maybe doesn't have the same medical benefits as some of the things that we're landing in the 14 to 17% category
Exactly.
that we've bred it away from.
Right, exactly.
Yep. So start low, go slow, microdosing. You don't need a lot.
Yeah.
And look at the percentages. Look at those cannabinoid profiles when you're purchasing, so you know. And
You want to know what's
It's
in
not
it.
about going in, and it's not gas. You're not going in, and 93 octane is not necessarily the best for your car. It's going in and saying, what do I want as an effect? So what I regret is not using it in a more targeted fashion. Like,
Right.
okay, this is how I want to feel at this moment,
And
or
that's
this is what I want to do today, and this is the
Right.
best cannabis for that. Most people, almost everyone I know, I have this bag of this amazing pot, and that's the pot they're smoking until that's gone, or if you're lucky, you
Yeah.
have 5 different types like that.
Yeah.
And you're changing it based on the smell or the potency or what have you. But very few people are getting a wide range of cannabis, being able to preserve it, or purchasing in such small quantities that they can get it for what they need and go get something different for the next activity or goal.
Right. And when we educate people, we talk about cannabis being 3 ways of using it.
yeah,
Medically, recreationally, and irresponsibly. And it all comes down to the consciousness that you have when you actually go to consume that plant.
Yep.
One of the most important things that when we're working with our patients, we not only look at their medical diagnoses, we look at their symptoms, and we look at all lifestyle. And the most important question that I ask them is this: what is important to you and how do you want to feel? Right? And that's how we customize and we tailor a care plan for them to use cannabis as medicine at the lowest possible dose to get the highest therapeutic medicinal benefit.
That's it.
and one of the things that we don't often talk about is the those percentages, whether it's 14% THC or 32% THC. And I don't think it's one of the considerations for most people when they're choosing a product.
It's
They
almost, I
don't
almost wish they didn't
understand.
list it. It's something that if in a dispensary, to some extent, they're doing people a disservice by listing that, because they're going in and they're looking for what's the highest number.
Because
it seems like you're getting the biggest bang for your buck.
Because
Well, yeah.
isn't that, we're a society of I want more, the bigger the better, the more the better. If one little bit works, then this much will work, and that's just not the way it is.
It isn't true. I've had patients that have come to me that have been using cannabis a specific way, and they're like, it's not working for me anymore. I don't tell them to take more. I
Right.
tell them to take less. And guess what? It works.
Yeah.
Right?
You can give yourself a ceiling to things, and a lot of cannabis has a ceiling. So no matter how much you smoke, almost all cannabis has a limiting factor. There's few strains, from what I know, that you can continue to consume and just ratchet that up. And those are a lot of fun, but most people I know are the best way I can explain it is they're smoking cannabis the way you'd go hit a keg party. It's how much can you consume, how high can I get? And I'm not saying it's bad. I was the biggest perpetrator of all, but if you step back from it for a bit and give yourself an honest look at it without for a little bit, you realize kind of some of the things you're missing. You realize that there was some things you're doing in life that you're numbing yourself to, that you probably want to experience and have that memory and enjoy it in a way that it's going to be a little more meaningful.
Yeah. So your story has been very helpful, and I'm certain it is going to help someone else out there
Yeah.
that's listening. Just before we end,
Yeah.
I just want to ask, what do you think is most important for people to know when they're going to start to explore cannabis?
It's a tough question. I would just say go slow and go with intent. Know what you want and recognize that it's like the cereal aisle at the grocery store. You might find a favorite, but it doesn't mean that there's not 10 more that you're going to enjoy just as much. You just have to go and experience that. So know your producer, know who's cultivating it, and know that it's done in a responsible and clean fashion, and go slow and
respect it.
Yeah.
Respect.
It's like the
plants.
ocean. If you don't respect it, it's going to hurt you.
There you go. There you go.
Right.
You've been so wonderful. Thank you
Appreciate
so
you
much
having
for
me.
coming
Thank you
on.
so much for
Absolutely.
coming.
Yeah, so before we wrap up the show, we're just going to talk a little bit about Green Nurse Group. We're a nonprofit whole health consulting agency. Dale does medical certifications, and Jody and I do consultations. We work together in the entourage fashion to help bring health and wellness using cannabis as a tool. So smile.amazon.com is, you can shop there. You can pick Green Nurse Group as your charity, and portion of the proceeds will go to us at no additional cost to you. And this helps us to be able to serve the underserved, such as things as if we're going to go into the hospital and see a patient, it'll pay for the $50 parking. Or if we're doing free visits, it'll help pay for that. Helps pay for literature, helps pay for education, and we get donations of medicine for patients when they need it. So smile.amazon.com. Facebook also has a charity that you can pick, the Green Nurse Group. Same thing, it's going to help us to serve the underserved, and we really appreciate your support. If you like Cannabis Radio Network and the Green Nurse Group, there are other shows. There's a new show that's coming out.
Coming up, yeah.
High Finance with Dimitri Nashat. Absolutely wonderful. He's hysterical. He's a funny guy, and his show is going to be wonderful, talking about money and cannabis. Then we have Donald Barrett. His show, if you haven't watched it, his last show this past Sunday night was probably the most compelling.
It was our favorite.
It was my favorite show. Yeah. He really opened up, I could cry, opened up his heart and really shared a very intimate personal story with everyone, and I truly appreciate that. The Barrett Report is very controversial, very fun, and he's on Sunday nights every night from 8 to 9.
And Average Joe Grow.
Jake Ganem has a show, The Average Joe Grow, so it's for the new grower.
Yeah. The
new grower, someone that is interested in learning how to grow for the first time. Mm-hmm. He touches upon the basics, the problems, the issues, everything in regards to how to grow. So this wraps up another episode of Green Nurse Radio. Thank you for joining us. Join us every Wednesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. And remember, it is all about living your best life.